Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big South by Southwest welcome to Bob Geldof.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Fuck me, it's Justin Bieber. Being Irish, I'm the only person who can legitimately say to you, Happy St. Patrick's Day this morning. Passion can't be over. That's a ludicrous argument. That music, by definition, is the only means of expression of the delirium of life. The only soul expression I can imagine that goes to the joy of existence, of being human. It's the great differentiator in South by Southwest. It isn't one of the Coachellas or the Glastonburys or one of the standard festivals of our time. It celebrates simply being a musician or a fan or a follower. I've lived my life, as probably most of you have, using this medium as the sole articulation of what I am, as the mechanism whereby I frame my experiences to the world. Suddenly the boys and girls with guitars were articulating other universes, other possibilities, not the future that had been mapped out for me by others, but something else, something still undefined, but possible. They articulated change. They articulated the necessity, the desirability, the inevitability of change. And they handed you the rhetoric of that change, rock and roll. And they handed you the instrument of change, rock and roll. And from that point on to this day, I make no apology, though it is quite embarrassing, to say that that literally is how you understand your world. That other great Irish skeptic, George Bernard Shaw, said, all change comes through the power of unreasonable people. I would suggest that most musicians are vaguely unreasonable, especially in this day and age if they expect to make a living out of the fucking thing. Rock and roll, forever in my life, suggests change, abundant optimism, and joy and hope. Rock and roll could only have come from this country. It is your great cultural gift to the world. But it may be over. It might just be that your gift was a 50-year pop, and I was so lucky to get in on this game halfway through its life. Are all songs from now on going to be trivial, or simply just good art? Or does the context in which we live now today, and here in this festival, mean that this art form that I value so greatly survives in a newer way? Because if you take what happened when the Carter family climbed over those mountains to meet up with the guy from RCA Victor, if you take that primal, deathless music of the blues and its crippling fatalism that never allowed a section of this society to move on, woke up this morning, it's shit again. Until some kids, white kids, heard it and responded, yeah, I know what you mean, dude. Let me try and move beyond that. Until some black people plugged in Chicago and made a racket out of this fatalism, turning it not so much into a moan of oppressed fear, but into a great whoop of possibility. When you alienate, when you disenfranchise, when you disempower entire sections of a community so they're not allowed in on the national economic commonweal, the American dream of the 50s, they find a mechanism of expression. If you're black, you howl a wop, bop, a lop, bam, boom. I get it. You don't have to write it down. That's enough. Fuck off is what he's saying. And then a young, beautiful white boy says, dude, I'm not that poor, I've got shoes. I'm fairly cool, they're suede. And I'm a little disturbed, they're blue. Do anything, don't fuck with me. Don't step on my shoes. Mick and Keith told me not to listen to them, to listen to something called Howling Wolf. Howling Wolf? What the Is that an animal, a man, or a force of nature? In fact, it was all three. And when I went to the local record shop and asked the Murray brothers had they heard of something called Howling Wolf, they stared at me and put on Smokestack Lightning. Oh! Breathtaking. Can that happen again? Does it happen? Is there a newer way of that happening? And must it happen? I argue yes. Rock and roll was the racket of democracy, and it was the full-throated roar of capitalism itself. Now, I've just been in Los Angeles and New York, and I'm loath to make generalizations. But you seem exhausted. America seems exhausted. Exhausted of being America. I don't think the American Revolution is over. I don't think the music of the American Revolution was pipes and drums. I think the music of the American Revolution is rock and roll. We've just heard how the American Revolution is taking place on the streets of Cairo, Tripoli, Tunis. The point is that this explosion, this revisiting of context, was critical. Rock and roll does not exist in a societal vacuum. It can't. It ceases almost to be if it does. And when rock and roll becomes about the height of your platform boots, your bubble perm, the length of your limousine, or your country mansion house, it is rendered meaningless. By definition, it must be about the society in which it's bred. Where are our Ramones and our Pistols today? Do we need them? Yes. Yes is the answer. Will they be found? Maybe not, is the point. Rock and roll demanded a change, a social revolution, brilliantly articulated by clever young people like Johnny Lydon. Funny, dismissive of everything, very like the early Beatles, but with teeth. Duran Duran and the Glam Kids absolutely epitomized the moment of yachts and yuppies and red suspenders and Porsches. Great. Cool, 18 and lots of money. Great. Then what? Everybody has got the means to say anything they want, but nobody has anything to say. Facebook is a friend and a fraud. iTunes is an ally and an enemy. Blogs are like assholes. Everybody's got one. This hyper-democracy of the web, you would think would give rise to a brilliant conversation. No, really. Most of it, you're inundated with the half-wit mutterings of the village idiot in the dark corner of the local pub. The cyber isolation of the teenage kid believing they're connected to a greater creative world is an illusion. It's a creative dead end. We live in a moment of fundamental history that will be talked about in 300 or 500 years, believe me. That moment when power ebbed from the west to the east after 500 years of constant growth. That moment when existential economic crisis exacerbated this movement. That moment when our success begot climate change. I don't hear the concern about the new technologies, or not even the concern, the delight in it. I don't hear when Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan sell us shadows of shadows, taking our money, paying themselves vast billions, bankrupting this nation and our world, and doing nothing about it, and not one of them are in jail. I don't hear that rage. I can't hear the disgust of the debasement of American politics when a senator in Washington sits as chair of a committee on terrorism and terrorizes fellow Americans because they have a different God. I don't hear the disgust in music, and I need to. It doesn't have to be literal. It has to suggest it. The future may not be ours, but our values must shape it. Khrushchev, on hearing rock and roll, said, it's one step from a saxophone to a switchblade. 5 years ago, again, the boys and girls with guitars were able to force the issue at the G8 in Gleneagles in Scotland, and we were able to cancel third world debt and double aid to the poorest people in the world to 50 billion a year. Before you go, that's a lot of money. Can I just tell you that the richest continent in the world, Europe, gets more aid than Africa, the poorest. We need someone to pause, to reflect, to consider, to be wise, to make decisions, or to interpret, to stop time for a moment and suggest. And that seems to be the function of the art. Dilution of news equals the dilution of music in the web. Thousands of bands all saying fuck all, a froth of a racket. The music I hear is continental navel gazing. Don't do it. Look up. Address the world with that confidence that is strictly the province of this country. Don't be protectionist. Don't be scared of the future. Whether you're a kid, a group, an individual, a state, or a country, look at it cold-eyed and try and steer the future. I'm going to finish with a quote from the great German poet Goethe. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has magic, power, and genius in it. That's true. Thank you. Thank you very much.